One of Queen Elizabeth's most treasured tiaras, a diamond piece worth a casual $15 million, quietly appeared inside a private auction listing. And the name being whispered in connection with it inside palace circles was Queen Camila. Within hours of that discovery, Princess Anne had already begun making calls. What started as a private family matter was rapidly becoming something the institution could not contain. Let me set the scene for you. Imagine your grandmother passes away. She leaves behind some beautiful jewelry. And then one day, you find out your stepmother is trying to sell it on eBay. Except instead of eBay, it's a private auction house. And instead of a few $100s, it's $15 million. That's the energy we're dealing with here. The piece in question was one of the most distinctive in Queen Elizabeth's personal collection. Documented in the Royal Archives. Photographed on the late Queen at a state banquet in the 1980s. Recognized immediately by anyone who had spent serious time studying the crown jewels. Estimated value? $15 million. But here's the thing. Royal jewels of this significance do not pass into private auction through ordinary channels. They are not sold without institutional process, formal legal review, and a level of documentation that leaves nothing ambiguous. There had been no such process. No announcement. No public record of any decision to transfer, sell, or release the piece from royal custody. And yet there it was. Listed under anonymous ownership. Moving quietly toward a transaction that, had it been completed, might never have attracted a single question. The name being connected to it? Queen Camila. When Princess Anne learned what had been found, she did not panic. Those who know her well will tell you that panic is not a register she operates in. What she did instead was something those around her recognized as far more serious than panic. She went very still. She asked 3 precise questions. And then she began making calls. The calls were not to journalists. They were not to palace press offices. They were to people she trusted. People who had served Elizabeth personally. People who understood the difference between an administrative oversight and something deliberate. And what they told her over the course of the hours that followed was enough to shift the nature of her response entirely. Because the tiara, it turned out, was not the beginning of the story. It was simply the moment the story had finally become impossible to ignore. Now let's talk about the money. Because this is where it gets interesting. The tiara alone was worth $15 million. But here's what the investigation revealed. The tiara had not disappeared overnight. It was the visible tip of something that had been developing slowly, methodically over a period stretching back much further than anyone had initially assumed. It had started with smaller pieces. A Victorian diamond brooch documented in Elizabeth's personal correspondence. A sapphire necklace she had worn at state banquets across 3 decades. An emerald choker with provenance stretching back through multiple reigns. Each piece had been quietly noted as absent during routine checks. Each time the matter had been allowed to rest without resolution. Reassigned to the category of administrative uncertainty. Which in palace culture can function as a very comfortable place to make inconvenient questions disappear. But Anne's circle did not allow the questions to disappear. Here's the detail that changes everything. A member of the household staff, speaking in strict confidence, described a pattern of late-night movements. Packages carefully wrapped. Transported from Clare Anne's house to Raymill House, Camilla's private estate in Wiltshire. Under conditions that were notable for how deliberately unremarkable they were made to appear. No formal logging. No accompanying documentation. Staff who asked questions were not disciplined. They were simply told in the particular tone that makes clear further inquiry would be unwise that the matter did not concern them. What the testimony implied was not impulsive. It was not opportunistic. It was organized. And according to the same source, not everything had been sold. Some of the pieces were still there. Held in a private vault at Raymill House, beyond the reach of official royal records, beyond the oversight of any institutional process that might have required their return. Hidden, in other words. Deliberately and carefully hidden. This is where the story gets really good. Months after the funeral, during a quiet review of Elizabeth's personal papers, a member of staff found an envelope. It was sealed. It was addressed in the late Queen's own handwriting. And in the upper left corner, written with the particular precision that characterized everything Elizabeth committed to paper, was a single instruction, for and to be opened only if questions arise regarding the jewels. You cannot make this up. Elizabeth literally left a sealed envelope with instructions for exactly this scenario. And opened it alone. What the letter contained was not dramatic in its language. Elizabeth had never been a woman who reached for drama when clarity would serve better. It was precise, quietly authoritative, and completely unambiguous. The letter named him explicitly as the designated guardian of Elizabeth's personal jewel collection. Not the crown jewels, which belonged to the institution, but the pieces Elizabeth had accumulated across her lifetime as personal possessions. And was asked to ensure they were preserved, protected, and passed forward to future generations through proper institutional channels. Not sold. Not transferred privately. Not redistributed without formal process. And then there was the passage concerning Camilla. Elizabeth asked that Camilla respect the distinction between what belonged to the crown, what belonged to the family, and what had been Elizabeth's alone to give. The language was measured. The meaning was not, and chose Clarence House deliberately. Not Balmoral, which carried too much of Elizabeth's presence. Not Windsor, which was too formal. Clarence House was Camilla's space. And wanted Camilla to be on familiar ground when the dossier was placed in front of her. She wanted there to be no argument afterward that the confrontation had been staged in a way designed to disadvantage or intimidate. Everything about Anne's approach had been constructed to be unimpeachable. The evidence would speak. The letter would speak. And arrived without announcement. Without ceremony. Without the kind of entourage that signals a desire to perform rather than to resolve. She carried a single folder. Inside it were photographs of the missing pieces, cross-referenced against archival records. Shipping logs that corroborated the testimony of the household staff. Records from auction houses showing anonymous consignments. And at the center of the folder, in its sealed envelope, Elizabeth's letter. And did not raise her voice. She never did in moments that mattered. She placed the folder on the table and began to speak in the manner that those who had witnessed her under pressure consistently described, measured, sequential, and completely without retreat. She presented each piece of evidence in the order that built the clearest possible picture. She did not editorialize. She allowed the documents, the photographs, and the testimonies to carry the weight that she had spent weeks assembling them to carry. Camilla listened. Her composure held. But those present noted its quality. It was the composure of someone working to maintain a surface rather than the composure of someone who has nothing to fear. She did not interrupt. She did not immediately deny. And then placed Elizabeth's letter on the table. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The handwriting was unmistakable. The instruction was plain. The boundary it drew was absolute. The silence that followed was unlike anything that had preceded it. Harry had been watching from a distance. Those close to him described the particular quality of his attention during that period. Not passive. Not detached. But the focused stillness of someone gathering themselves before a decision that cannot be undone. He had access to information that the press did not. He understood better than most the specific emotional weight carried by certain pieces in his mother's history. And when the pearl bracelet was publicly named among the items reportedly stored at Raymill House, something shifted. He did not call the palace. He did not request a conversation. He simply released the letters. They were a selection of personal correspondence written by Diana. Not intended for publication. Not prepared for public consumption. But unmistakably and undeniably authentic. Among them was a passage describing the pearl bracelet with a specificity that removed all possibility of confusion. Diana had written about what she hoped would happen to her most personal possessions. She had spoken with Elizabeth about it directly. Elizabeth had received it into her personal keeping with an explicit understanding of what it represented. The implication was devastating. The bracelet had not been lost. It had not been misplaced. According to Diana's own words, its intended destination had been made perfectly clear. And what had reportedly happened to it afterward stood in direct contradiction to everything Diana had asked for. The tiara listing was formally withdrawn. A comprehensive inventory review was officially initiated through proper institutional channels. The Victorian diamond brooch came back. Then the sapphire necklace. Then the emerald choker. And finally, handled with a particular care that those present described as ceremony rather than procedure, Diana's pearl bracelet. Each piece was photographed, catalogued, and formally documented in the manner that should have governed its custody from the very beginning. And did not attend the formal inventory process. She had done what she came to do. She returned to her schedule, engagements, visits, duties, with the same unbroken regularity that had defined her public life. For Camilla, nothing was quite over. She retained her position. She continued to appear at Charles's side. But the quality of the space around her had changed. This story was never really about a tiara. Or jewelry. Or even Anne's fury. It was about $15 million. It was about 70 years of history. And it was about a queen who left behind a letter in a sealed envelope with instructions for exactly this scenario. Elizabeth spent 70 years ensuring the crown would outlast her. And she placed her trust in exactly the right person. And didn't just protect the jewels. She protected her mother's legacy. She protected Diana's memory. And she sent a message that will not be forgotten anytime soon. When Anne goes very still and starts making calls, someone is about to have a very bad day. And on this particular day, that someone was Camilla. Subscribe to the Meghan Markle Report for more royal investigations. Drop your thoughts below. Was Anne right to confront Camilla? I read every single comment. See you in the next one.